Hey guys, so today I'm going to be taking a quick look at a Cobalt Strike shellcode loader and some methods that you can use to decode that. So I've already downloaded the file from Malware Bazaar, and the link will be in the description below. And I've unzipped the file with the password infected and created a copy, which is right here, as cobalt_file.exe. So since I've got that file, I'm just going to do some quick analysis using detected easy. I'm going to take a quick look at the entropy, just to see if there are any embedded files, and that doesn't look to be the case. Um, in the case of where there was an embedded file, you would see a red line sitting up towards this 8 value, and it will be very high and flat. And since that's not the case here, I'm going to assume there's not an embedded payload, at least not a large one. I'm also going to take a look at the import table. And if I have a quick look through that, we can see references to create named pipe. And if we scroll down a bit, we can see a reference to virtual alloc. And that's an API that's used to allocate memory buffers. And generally, that's used to create buffers for any embedded content that may be within the file. And we know from the entropy that there's not a full file, probably not a full file in there, but there may be something else. And we'll take a quick look at that in a moment. We go back to detected easy. You can also see that the file is 64-bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that inside of x64 dbg. And I'm going to go in this bottom left corner and just type BP virtual alloc. And using that, we can see the call of virtual alloc, and we can monitor anything that the file is writing to it. So since we have the breakpoint, we can hit continue. And x64dbg has broken on a TLS callback. We can skip through that. Skip through again. We've hit the entry point. And we can skip past that for now. And now we hit that call to virtual alloc, which we saw in the import table. Now, if we want to monitor virtual alloc, we can let the malware hit that API, and then we can use this button up at top, which is execute until return. So if we hit that, that will allow the API call to run, and we can grab the address of the memory buffer that it creates. And in that case, that's in the top right corner here in RAX. So we can take that value and go follow in dump. And here we can see the new empty memory buffer that was created. So what we want to do is we want to monitor that buffer with a hardware breakpoint. And I'm going to do that by selecting the first byte, going to breakpoint, hardware access, and then byte. And now we'll get an alert if anything writes anything to this buffer. So if we allow the malware to continue to run, we can see that the hardware breakpoint has been triggered and an FC byte has been written into the first spot. And FC is a really common first byte for shellcode, so that's pretty interesting. If it was something like a full PE file, we would probably see an M and then a Z, and then this file cannot be run in DOS mode, and so on and so on. But in this case, it's FC, so that's probably shellcode. And what we want to do is we want to allow this memory buffer to fill up, but we don't want to let the malware execute it until we've had a chance to take a look. So what we can do is let the malware finish what it's doing with another execute until return. And hitting that execute until return, we can see that the memory buffer has filled up with what looks like junk text. But since that first byte is 0xFC, I'm reasonably suspicious that that's shellcode. So what I can do to validate that is right click on that first byte and hit follow in disassembler. And what that will do is it will populate the disassembly window with the values from this memory buffer. And here we can see FC48 as well as FC48 in this window down here. So now that the bytes from the memory buffer are in the disassembly, we can take a look to see if there are any errors or any glaring red problems, or just anything that looks wrong. But in this case, all of these bytes have disassembled correctly. We can see a function call. We can see that FC byte, which is the clear direction flag. We can see some looping instructions, and we can see just a bunch of random stuff. But the main point here is that there are no errors, and that's a pretty good validation that this is some kind of code. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that first byte. I'm going to remove the hardware breakpoint, and I'm actually going to create another one. But this time, instead of an access byte, I'm going to put an execute. Sorry, instead of an access breakpoint, I'm going to set an execute breakpoint. And that means we'll get an alert. If any, we'll get an alert if this first byte is executed. And if we hit continue, yeah, immediately we hit a hardware breakpoint execute at that address. So that means that whatever is in here is definitely being executed. Now, trying to go through the raw disassembly without any knowledge of what it's doing is quite difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the first byte and I'm going to find the address of that buffer in memory. And I'm going to do that with the follow in memory map. Ding that button takes us to the memory map window, and we can see this address here of hex 16,000 or 160,000, I'm not too sure. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that line and I'm going to say dump memory to file. Now I'm just going to go to my desktop, find my malware folder, and just save the memory dump there. And I'm just going to leave the default file. So now that that's saved to a file, we can quickly open it up in a hex editor and just make sure that it's dumped correctly. And that seems to be the case. The FC that we expected at the front is still there. And if we take a quick scroll, we can see a plain text string win inet. We can see a user agent. And we can even see an IP address, which may be a C2. This 146.190, so on, so on. So what I'm going to do, since I suspect this is shellcode, is I'm going to open up a command prompt and I'm going to run the Speakeasy emulator. So I'll put a link to that in the description so that you can install it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type Speakeasy. We know that the file is 64-bit, so we want to specify that with -A x64. We suspect it's shellcode and not a full PE file, so -R for raw. And I'm going to add -T, which is target, and we just add the name of our file to it, which is this. So if we allow that to run, and the code is shellcode, we should be able to get a list of function calls that are made. And it looks like that's worked. So we can zoom in a little bit and see a reference to load library A with that win inet string. And win inet is a library for making HTTP calls. So you can see that library is loaded. You can see the Internet Open A has been called, and also Internet Connect A with that IP address that we saw before. So following that, we can also see the user agent and a reference to virtualloc and internet read file. So we can determine from that that the shellcode loads this win inet library, calls out to this C2, likely with this user agent, and then attempts to allocate a buffer, read a file from the IP address, and probably save it here. So with that knowledge, we know what the shellcode is doing, and we also know where it's calling out to. And it's worth noting that the shellcode won't run completely because there's no internet connection in this virtual machine, so it's going to error out when it tries to call out and download the file. So now that we've grabbed the C2, we can also go back to x64 DBG and try to determine the same information. Now with Cobalt Strike shellcode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the shellcode, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit G, and that will give us the graph view. And most of the time, the point where the actual API calls are made is at the very end of the graph, usually in a call or a jump instruction, and very typically a jump to a register and not a specific address. And in this case, at the very bottom of the graph, we can see this jump RAX. And that's going to be where the actual function calls are made. So what we can do is hit F2 and create a breakpoint there. And we can allow the shellcode to run. And if we hit continue, we immediately hit that jump RAX, and we can see this load library call to win INET. And that's exactly what we saw within the Speakeasy emulator. We hit run again, we hit the breakpoint again with win INET internet open A. Again, exactly the same as what we saw with the emulator. We can hit run again. We see internet connect A with the same IP address as seen in Speakeasy. HTTP open request with what looks like a partial URL. Not sure if that's... Oh yeah, it is. It's in Speakeasy as well. I missed that before. Hit run again. We can see send request A with the user agent. And then after that, we don't get any more API calls. And that's most likely, again, because we don't have internet inside of this virtual machine, and it's just going to keep calling this API until it gets a result. But yeah, now we have successfully obtained the C2 address with the Speakeasy emulator, and we've also obtained it using x64 DBG. And it's worth noting that that C2 is actually in plain text inside of the code, but that's not always going to be the case. And both of these methods will work even when that IP address has been encoded or is obfuscated in some way.